Mrs. Happy Catholic here, seeking to bring you authenticity, perspective, and connectedness. Welcome. Hello, everyone. I'm Mrs. Happy Catholic, and today I have another personal interview on my channel, and Dominic D'Souza is my guest. Hey, everyone. How are you doing today, Dominic?
I'm good. Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me, Laura.
Awesome. Yeah. And before I forget, I want to make sure that you can put in a plug for any of your platforms or projects that you're working on right now so people know where to find you.
Oh, we can go there for a second if you like. Yeah, I've got Smart Catholics. I've been building that for 4 years. I'm still trying to find out where the Holy Spirit wants that thing to go. I think it's going cool places, and I won't lie. I think that partnering up with you guys and Trad Recovery and the amazing people you're pulling together, I really want to lean into that. I think that's the future of where I'm trying to go, and how I'm serving the church with that. So Pope Francis' Generation wrapped its last episode recently, and Paul then went off to start a new podcast that Smart Catholics is sponsoring called Catholic Third Space. So I'm no longer doing that, but I am supporting him with that. That kind of frees me up a little bit to work on other fun projects. So I have a writing community called Legend Fiction. We are actually, as of this recording, about 30 days out from our third annual online convention, which is open for anybody to come and join us. So fun, faith, and fandoms. So loads of fun there called Legend Haven. And I have a magazine called Halo Zest, like Catholic BuzzFeed, I guess, where I want to publish and meet cool creators who are doing fun things and help platform them. So yeah, loads of things going on.
Oh man, sounds like a lot of busy things. That would be my youngest. Yes, lots of good things. Awesome. Well, you're just so involved and you're so willing to engage with the Catholic community, and I think it's great. And I'm so excited now that your story is starting to get out because you did an interview with Paul Fahey. So that was his initial podcast, right, for the Third Space podcast that he's
That's
running.
right. Yeah, we kicked it off.
That is so cool. And I listened to it. It was so great. And yeah, I'm just really excited for my audience to hear your story, and that now that you're at a place of being ready to share that. Because I know sometimes, you're just going through stuff and you don't need to be, out there telling everybody or too involved, because sometimes you need some space. And so it seems like you've had some time from when things were more intense and you're looking back and having these reflections, and they were excellent. So I just, however you want to get started into that story, talking about, your faith as a child and how that's morphed as you've grown older, I would love to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to see where we can go. I mean, it's a 10-year sort of deconstruction journey, but I think given the audience of who we're talking to, I think mostly your trad recovery community and people on your channel, I'm guessing. So I grew up as a radical traditionalist, and then it was kind of, meeting my wife and then meeting Pope Francis that really helped me to start turning things around. There was a lot of rethinking that happened, but I think a lot of the thinking was able to happen because I had certain, how do you say, like laws or rules or loves that were very deep. And I was not seeing them mediated to me or reflected to me, but they just felt absolutely obvious to me. So because of the hunger to relate to God in a specific way and to relate to other people in a specific way, how do I say, it's like the conversions through the heart are come in bucket loads, and conversions through the mind are like, very, very, few numbers of them. Like we can learn a metric ton of stuff, but until your heart is actually moved, you don't actually do anything. I think that the Holy Spirit, or Our Lady, was working through my heart for a long time, and I'll leave everybody to decide if it works or not. But it's what moved my head to then try to figure out, how do I reach these conclusions that I've intuited, or how do I build a life where these things make sense? So, I think the biggest, this is a point that I brought up, at least for myself in public, was with Paul, was talking about this concept of truth stacking, which I think is the healthy way to go about this, which is there's a lot of good in almost any community. I mean, people are passionate about these things and they have very good reasons for them. And we're not going to tell everybody they're silly or whatever because they don't think the way I do or the way anybody does. Everybody often has a very good reason for why they want to get things done. And maybe it's a matter of behavior, or it's a matter of how the tribe comes together to get something done. Um, and then it's how we live it out. And maybe that's where we can have problems sometimes. I think for me, looking back at my past, I'm trying to keep a sense of balance. Like, they were amazing people, wonderful people in my childhood and growing up who were wonderful, maybe in spite of how they lived, or the communities or the ideologies. Maybe that's the right word. The ideologies that they were a part of. They were wonderful people in spite of that. Um, and the same thing with like the different traditions. Being very radical traditionalist, but then also growing up, um, discovering and exploring a variety of different other traditions in the church, and being able to appreciate those, being able to see the good in them, see the good that there is in radical traditionalism. Um, but like I said, it's truth stacking. So it's being able to hold multiple things in at the same time. So there can be massively problematic things, and there can also be really beautiful things. So it's being able to hold both. It's not just cognitive dissonance, but I think it's something that a mature you know, adult has to do, to be able to hold two things at once. Like, we do this with our kids all the time. Like, you're an absolutely innocent, beautiful little thing. Like, I look at my little girl all the time. And you're also a narcissistic little messy grubby monger. And both are true in different ways. And we have to learn to work with one and work with the other and stuff. So
Right. No, that's a really good point. It's really hard. That's the more difficult path, is of finding and acknowledging the good and not throwing it out, even though there's bad mixed in and human error. But it's like more comfortable to just think about taking yourself away, or, well, I'll just take these good things, I'll make my own thing over here. But we see that doesn't work. Like, that's not living in the body of Christ. And that our Lord understood that when he started the church, that there would be all kinds of troubles and things, but he still never gave us that out as if it were some kind of solution. And so, yeah, it's definitely a challenge though. And I know it's painful for people, but seeing people like you who have gone through different things and synthesized them, and you're able to still have a vibrant faith and be working in the church, and like, it just shows people that there's hope and what's possible, and that you don't have to be broken and totally shut down by those things, even though they're real, and we don't want to dismiss them, because they're very effective. And I understand why people go through some really severe kinds of abuse and stuff, and they don't find their way back from that, or it takes them a really long time. But God is so patient. He understands, where you need to go and when, and he's just waiting and he's guiding you. So I see that all over in people's lives that I talk to. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. That specific point right there, like, there's people who have had some pretty horrific abuse or traumatic stuff done to them, or they witnessed it or something like this, and it absolutely shattered their ability to have any sort of relationship with, how would you say, the physical and visible community of the church around them, and they just can't do it. They can't stomach it. It's not wonderful. I don't know. Maybe it's an awful show, but it was called Midnight Mass, and it was a horror series on Netflix, and it was bad in many ways. It was actually, what was funny about it is I watched the whole thing through and I absolutely hated every minute. I don't know really why I did, but I then went and wrote a blog article sort of savaging it. And then a nun tweeted back, she's like, well, where's the God in this? Where can you find God in this? And I then went back and re-looked at the movie, and then completely reversed my opinion, rewrote the whole blog post, and realized, dang it, this thing actually has a very, very powerful point, and I completely missed it. And one of the major points was, what happens when the thing that you hold to be beautiful and true and good, what happens when that becomes an absolutely monstrous, horrific thing? How do you relate to that? And there are some people who have been through those, situations of personal abuse or spiritual abuse. And the thing that everybody tells you is supposed to be good and beautiful and holy is now a harbinger or a mouthpiece for what seems like absolutely evil things. And you can't see or keep the two together. But now you're stuck because you're like, these good and beautiful things must exist, but you can't see them within, let's say, the hierarchy that you're told is supposed to be the one mediating it to you. You can't see it there, so you have to go find it maybe not just somewhere else, you have to step away from everything. This is why I think for a lot of people who have been burned either as trads and they're recovering, or they're not sure how to relate to the hierarchy, or how to relate to religious community, or even just religious living at all. I think I would recommend, don't worry about it. Don't stress about it too much. If you have to go spend time in the desert for a long period, I think God will understand. Um, Now the important thing is, are we as human members of this family, are we able to also understand the same thing? That there are some people who cannot see what we see, maybe through no fault of their own, or maybe through a damaged or a act of pain or trauma, are no longer able to see what we see about the things that we say, and they cannot get to where we are. It's just a bridge too
Right.
far. So what do we do? Do we dismiss them, or are we able to just sit with them? I really like this sense that as long as there's as long as we can see goodwill coming from a person, right? That's kind of the assumption here. If there's like ill will coming from a person, okay, that's a whole different discussion. But if there's a
Right.
desire to be a good human being, and a desire for good, we should be able to sit down with a person and go, you can tell me whatever you want. You can say whatever you like. You should be able to say that. I should be kind of big enough to be able to hear that without getting defensive, without having to stop you at every point and point out, here's why it's wrong. Basically, do you feel safe telling me anything? Um, I think that is an insanely important position to be in. And I think that it's people who have been through a lot of pain, who are reconstructing or deconstructing, are really the ones who do this best, who understand why that is needed. Until you reach that point, all you can think about is like, I'm right, you're wrong. Here's where you need to change your opinion. Here's how I got to where I am. Here's why I'm correct. Until you've been through hell and back, you don't get it the same way. Why we just need to sit together. And maybe it's not in the answers, it's in how you treat me or how we treat each other. That's almost a better indication that you believe what you say you believe. So being able to say that, being able to like internally look at somebody and go, I'm not afraid of you. There's nothing you could say or do that would, turn me away. And like, okay, maybe we'll have an argument right now, but can we go for coffee afterwards? Right.
That's great.
It's taken me 10 years to warm up to that when I saw, I think C.S. Lewis wrote that line. And I'm like, how the heck did you have, beer or coffee with somebody you profoundly disagree with? Like, they're a horrible human being. And now I'm like, honestly, the words we say don't matter half as much as we think they do, because way too many of us are, especially like in this particular space, we're talking about a space where people are in pain or traumatized, or carrying things like shame or guilt, or harboring beliefs that they never agreed to, that were sort of passed on to them, or habits, that they don't really want, or heck, the ghosts and influences of other people that they don't actually um, want. And unless you do stuff like a whole lot of therapy or self-reflection and so on to just be able to let all of that stuff go and come back to being you, there's a lot of us, of parts of who we are, where we're not totally free. We're not like, who you think you are is not yet fully here. And most of us are running around on autopilot. We're butt dialing our way through life. And that was totally me. If somebody opens their mouths and I'm a total NPC, I'm just waiting for you to shut up so that I can say my line. I've got like a decision tree, and I've got like ABC that I say whenever somebody brings up this topic, I know exactly what to say. I mean, there's a reason why we hate this kind of behavior. It's not a real human being. You're not really here. Somebody who's been through this level of pain, um, and recovery, uh, has a chance to understand the real human thing that's really needed here. And I think it's in those moments, it's in that reality where the Holy Spirit can actually work. Um, because it's only when an actual human person is like really there and able to actually see another human person. Well, that's Christ right there. That's the Holy Spirit right there. They've actually been able to sort of get through or be able to look out through your eyes, or you're able to finally see them in somebody else's eyes. I don't know, that kind of went on a tangent there.
No, I think it was really good because, I mean, a lot of my viewers can really relate to what we're talking about, and just still struggling with different elements of their faith and comfort with things that they were hurt by or confused by, and wondering if that's okay. Like they carry around a lot of shame, or feeling like they're not as good as they should be or something, or they just need to hurry up and get with the program, or that maybe their experience isn't valid enough for someone to just sit and be okay with that. Just like you are where you're at, and God is not judging that you are doing a wrong thing if that is a situation beyond your control and you're doing your best to deal with it. Like you said, people of goodwill. And I believe most people are people of goodwill, and they're just trying according to what they know best. Getting back to your story a little bit, and like you're transitioning from, growing up as someone who's just being formed in the faith, and they were just receiving whatever's around them, and how that sunk into you and what you took away from that. Like, what do you still love about that time, and what have you laid aside as maybe not healthy for your spiritual life now?
Wow. Okay. I think one little example that so with my conversation with Paul, I didn't really get into a lot of the TFP, tradition family property stuff. So what used to be, I used to feel like it was a high point of I was about 16 or 17, high point of my teen years was, we were living in France at the time. So I did 1 year in France with an English boarding school, way out, like 2 hours, I think, south of Paris. And over, I think it was spring break or summer break, I can't remember. We, my two of my brothers and myself, we drove up, or we flew up to Austria for a TFP summer camp. And this was, Austria is just absolutely gorgeous, of course. And there was a moment where we were sailing down the Danube, and a group of us just kind of watching these castles come around the corners of the bends of the river. And so that was just a beautiful thing. The location was just stunning and gorgeous. And of course, Vienna is beautiful and so on. And so, of course, I absolutely loved this whole thing. And there's a lot of dopamine going on. And there was one little point where I was called to address the entire room as a representative of Australia. And so there were people like bigwigs as far as this community is concerned from all over the world, representatives from all over the world. And so of course, I felt very important, in myself, getting up there and talking to everybody. And I didn't have anything new to say, just confirming this was a good thing and we were all getting along. And then I went back to my life at the school that we were at. And see, I didn't have for example, the catechism or sacred scripture on my bedside table. I had a copy of what's called the RCR, Revolution Counter Revolution. That was my bedside Bible. And I would read and reread that thing over and over and over. And for those who don't know what that is, it's it's an overview of history, that, as I look back on it now, it's profoundly oversimplistic, trying to chart the outcome of the last few centuries as a masterminded plot, that has slow and fast movements, that's increasingly comprehensive. It's like a master conspiracy theory that is able to absorb anything, whether progressive or regressive action. All of it can be accounted for the same, anti-Christian progress. That's a countdown. It's a march down to hell together, or something like this. Obviously, as I've said with Paul's conversation, it's a very apocalyptic thing. Like every year, we're like, is next year going to be 3 days of darkness and reign of Our Lady? Most people on earth are going to die, and of course we're going to make it through because of course we're the righteous ones. And so that book was like very important because it gave me, it was my sense of purpose. It was my sense of identity. This is how I'm going to be a good person. It's how I'm going to be a good soldier. And I remember somebody once complimenting me for getting it right. You know, she was also a member of the same group up in our area where we lived in Pennsylvania. And our family was kind of always on the outs with the local group. Variety of reasons, don't totally know why. A lot of politics, I think, that was going on. And I remember once being praised for being more TFP than the average kids going to the actual local TFP schools. And I mean, that felt great. That's being called more American than the average Joe. Being somebody coming from another country, it's like, wow, I was really happy at that. And so then the things then started to shift. So first of all, living in this apocalyptic view of the world, and then just cramming in the sacraments and the liturgical year, right? To make sure that we stay inoculated and insulated from anything that could sort of get in under the wire. And there were always, everything's trying to get in under the wire. You know, all the things that you like. Yep, that's how you're getting hacked and stuff. My poor brothers and sisters, like it was pretty awful in many ways in terms of the human organism trying to develop and adapt to its environment, and then having ideologies, you know, cramping things and shutting things down, you know.
Even your own just different tastes developing, but having those demonized, like it's not even safe to develop likes and dislikes because it's probably just your flesh, you know, dragging you around and exposing you to more temptation. So then you're just like, how do I shut this down? Like, and you can't. Wow.
Yeah, there's an indication of an inability to handle people. I mean, really, it's an inability to accompany, right? That was not a virtue. There was one of the words that would come up a lot was that they would use to decry Vatican II and the Church Fathers and the Church of the modern day is ambiguity. And they would go, oh, look at how ambiguous it all is. And then I read a line more recently, in the last couple of years, that threw a fresh light on it. And as soon as I read it, I thought, oh, this is absolutely true. When your kid comes up to you and they ask you for something that you know is not good for them, or you don't have an answer that is appropriate for where they are, well, what do? You give them an ambiguous answer. You give them an answer that could be taken a variety of different ways, that you know leaves them perhaps in a safe place, partly because now is not the right time for them to actually have the answer, but an answer must be given. A lot more development needs to happen. And so you might actually be vague, or you might actually allow multiple interpretations of the answer that you give the child. Heck, this happens in business all the time. This happens in therapy all the time. Somebody thinks that they're ready for like a hard truth, and you're like, well, and then 3 years later, you come back and you go, yeah, I realize I was not yet ready. I now know what you were trying to tell me. And if I had the right mindset, I could have seen what you were saying, but at the time I wasn't ready to hear it. And when I saw that definition of how the virtue of ambiguity, I thought, oh, I wonder if this is what was going on with, you know, what the church fathers had to deal with or negotiate when they're trying to develop language that could speak to the human family at large, knowing that everybody is bringing their own, not just opinions, but their own definitions of words. You know, it's like you need an entire lexicon to accompany all of the documents, and that's almost impossible because of the different ways that we all use words around the world. Anyhow.
No, that's a great point. Also, because ambiguity sometimes results from trying to address something that has multiple loopholes, if you will, or so many scenarios in which it could be at play. And the church doesn't want to be too definite, if you will, and to exclude things that could very well happen that she would need to deal with. But everyone else isn't thinking necessarily from a pastoral perspective in that way. They're not understanding all the different ways that a situation could develop or manifest and how the church would have to deal with that. It's interesting, like when you read canon law and you see how the church has thought through so many different scenarios of human experience and is trying to be prepared for, if this happens, then this is what we'll do. And if this happens, this is how we'll take care of it. And you're like, wow. I mean, it just shows you how much the church has been through, that experientially has learned how they have to deal with so many different things that just wouldn't even occur to the average person. And there's even more of that hasn't been, detailed and addressed, but it's coming up all over the place. And priests and bishops have to deal with this. And then they have to write about it somehow and still make it understandable for the laity. And that's just not the realm on which we operate. I'm not saying that, they're just always above us and we can't understand what it's like for them, but there is a way in which we don't swim in those waters. And so it's very tempting to be so black and white in your thinking that you say, well, it's just really simple. And we only would have to, talk about things one way or this would never happen. And it's like, well, you might like to think that, but you have no idea what's out there. The church is a mother for sure. She understands all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. There are so many opportunities. There's so many situations where it is just not, there might be a truth, but the person you're talking to is not at a point where they're even interested in hearing that. And so you have to then communicate it in a way maybe where they can hear it. And that's how you get a lot of the parables, there's sometimes there's or even in just fairy tales or myths or something, there's deliberate vagueness or deliberate ambiguity introduced into these, because Christ will straight up say, let those who have ears hear. If you don't have the ears, you don't have the eyes, then you're going to get some other different value out of it. But those who know what I'm talking about will be able to pierce, because it's not always possible to just, I don't know, just, how do you say it? It's like truth cannot be communicated outside of love. If it is, it just becomes a slicing sword and it just hurts everybody. But what is love but a relationship between people? And so the truth has to be mediated, in that way. Well, so coming back a little bit to the story, this point about ambiguity would be a problem for me, because there was one year where I went to spend a year in Christendom college. And this was kind of my first immersion in just dealing with people outside of my family for like a whole year. And now, first of all, absolutely loved it. Like, I loved that year. I got into all of the wrong fights on all the wrong issues and stuff, like trying to get the Latin Mass on campus and like trying to get rid of all of the music I didn't like. And it was, I was an embarrassment in some ways. But I ended up having so much fun because my dad gave me one piece of advice. He's like, don't go in there to fight, go in there to make friends. And that was really hard. I felt like I was gagging myself on all of I wanted to be the culture warrior for, all of this stuff. I wanted to go on to get a degree in history or theology and use that to prove that RCR document, or to sort of write my own contribution or own way through it, how I was making sense of it. And well, I'm glad I didn't finish going to Christendom, because that probably would have been a spiritual problem for me. So I dropped out after 1 year. But throughout that year, I would be stuck with this cognitive dissonance of, here's what I say and think internally, but when I go to talk to you about anything, I'm constantly couching it in different words because I didn't want to tick you off. I didn't want to turn you away. I mean, I wanted to learn how to cultivate those friendships. It was those lessons of learning how to begin to learn how to accompany and sit with somebody else that I profoundly disagreed with or disliked or wanted to like. Those were life skills that I had never been taught. I'd never really seen mediated. It was, and for my childhood, a lot of it was, we'll be with them and then we'll come home and savage them, and behind closed doors talk about how and where they're deficient or instead of providing sort of mental tools to the kids, like, you just don't savage people behind closed doors. Like you're always then walking into any family or any relationship. Well, as Pope Francis would say, speaking out of both sides of your mouth, right? And you can't trust a person. Like, the moment you find out that that's what somebody does, you can never really trust that person again. And we would sort of struggle with that because I'm sure some of us would wonder, well, who else is doing this about us? And of course, we would sometimes hear through the grapevines, people would have differences of opinion or problems with us. And so it was this sense of feeling like I'm always out of joint with the rest of the world. I feel like I'm out of joint with reality. I'm disconnected from, I'm not able to actually connect with other people. And this is sort of the problem of, I mentioned infernalism and with Paul, it's this, driving down the highway and looking at all these other people in other cars, or we're driving through the city, like in Australia, and I'll look at people walking down the sidewalks and think, man, nobody's witnessing to them or something, and never going to see them again. In fact, they're not going to have a very good future because nobody's there to save them or something. And as a kid thinking that, and then kind of growing up and realizing, do I actually think that everybody's going to be lost in an irreversible way? Like, it's funny about Fatima. Somebody texted me through the Trad Recovery platform, going like, "What do you think about how do you deal with this whole Fatima thing?" The biggest thing that turned Fatima around for me was realizing, why is it that we treat all of the visions of Fatima as, how do you say, symbolic? They're all symbolic, except for the one about hell. That's the part that's actually literal, right?
Man.
And I remember thinking, well, I mean, of course, that was just normal. Parents would use that to sort of like, get on the straight and narrow and look at what Our Lady, what she was recommending, and here's why it's so serious. But then the whole Pope's walk and the bullets and the arrows, like, that's obviously all symbolic. And then the last couple of years, I thought, well, wait a second. What if it's all symbolic language? Well, then what does that mean about what she had to say? Because if it's a symbol, there's different interpretations to symbols. And so what you see is not necessarily a reflection of reality. It's an indication of what's happening in meta reality. Mm-hmm. And so that then started turning my thinking around, where not just like maybe there's a chance for everybody, but the sense that I don't live as though I actually believe that the Massa Damnata is real. I don't live that way. In fact, I don't know anybody who lives that way. We actually all live in a state of like hope, that hopefully, everybody will make it, because I can't take responsibility for everybody around me. I can barely handle me. Right? So those were like axioms, foundational stuff. And it was just little, I guess, not just realizations. It's a realization that this is a reality I believe, and this is the way I'm already living. And I just woke up one day and sort of realized, oh, I'm already living this way. This is what belief is. It's something that you are actually doing, not just something you assent to. Yeah. And so if this is what I actually think, well, then what does my faith then actually mean to me? How do I relate to it? How do I live it out? And am I actually understanding what I've been told? And this is where I'm still trying to figure this out, but it's a deconstruction. There's a lot of deconstructing needed to sort of rescue our catechesis from all of the reading in that, all of the opinions that we read into catechesis and into sacred scripture, as opposed to allowing it to actually say what it says on its own terms. And then I think you actually find out what the church actually has to say is a whole lot less than we actually think she has to say. And there's a whole lot of inference that we have added to it to try to make sense for the specific culture that we live in, the First World West,
Right.
You get rid of all of that stuff. And if we go back, like, not just go back to primary sources, but go back to the primary messaging, there's a lot more discussion that has to happen around that. And that's where my mind is. That's where my heart is where I'm trying to go. I don't have the answers, but it creates for a whole lot of really good discussions.
Oh, man. That's so funny that you bring that up, because I was talking to a friend yesterday who had known a lot of Orthodox Jews when she was in college. Mm-hmm. And she said, some of them she saw go on to get married and things, but the rabbis at the time were very strict about the rules for courtship, and the two to-be spouses would never even touch each other at all before they got married. There was none of that, because even though they're going off of, the same books in the Bible that we have, at least from the Old Testament, and it's not that strict, but they were like, well, but the point is we don't want it to get to a certain point. So we're going to bring it back a bunch of notches to keep you safe, so that we are always doing the right thing and never, screwing around. And so it's a good intention, but again, it's like you're adding to the law. You're adding on even more of a burden and more limitations than God himself put in there, as if his law is not sufficient. You're going to improve it. You're going to be better. You're going to protect people more and impose this on them. And it actually ends up being damaging to their relationships down the road. And so you see that it doesn't play out very well, or they don't even know if they like each other. They get married and then they're like, oh, well, now, now that things are different, we're married and everything goes basically because my situation has changed. I don't feel the same way I thought I would. I didn't really know this person like I thought I would. And it's just interesting. It's just one example of that. But, we see that in our own Catholic world. And like you're saying, especially in traditionalism, people want to be safe. And the complaint about ambiguity is connected to this, because they almost want every little detail of their lives to be ironed out in moral terms. Venial sin, mortal sin, fault, no fault, and then they know where they're safe. But that, again, it's like, but life is more intricate, and life is really a relationship with God and everyone in your life. And you can't regulate it or be so sure. Wouldn't that be great? But it's like, you can't even be morally certain that you're in a state of grace at one point or another. You may think you are, but you can't actually say with certainty. And that's how they tried to trap St. Joan of Arc with the inquisitors, like trying to get her to say, yes, I'm in a state of grace. And she said, she totally surprised them with her answer. And it was completely right on Catholic, moral theology. And that it's just so interesting to me how we do that as humans. We think, oh, God gave me this great thing. I'm going to go in, I'm going to make it better. This is how it really should be. So you're all passionate about this as a child and a teenager, and you're like, you're really living out. People are telling you you're even going above and beyond that. And you're like, yes. So what is that like to come to a realization that it was too much?
Oh, goodness. It was a Saturday, 11 and a half years ago, where I just decided I'm just going to go to the ordinary form, and that's going to fulfill my Sunday obligation. And I mean, I could have dropped a nuclear weapon on my family with that. And I just went and did it. And of course, the whole family was absolutely convinced I was going to destroy the family. And I had a friend who was staying with us at the time, and he just couldn't stop laughing at me because I kept feeling this weird sense of like, whoa, I'm coming home, as I was walking up the parking lot towards that Saturday evening mass. And then the next morning, stuck to my guns, and I did not go to the Tridentine, right, to the extraordinary form. And of course, inside, I'm like getting all like, scared and existential. And then at the other side, it's like, no, actually, I fulfilled the obligation, and the liturgy, the ritual, the mass is appropriate and it's correct. That sense of it's coming home, and then to realize the water's not fine on this side, but there is Peter, there is the Pope, and you can ladder things down from that, and you can, and even that's not a done deal in the sense of, that, like you're saying, that sense of that scrupulous, rigid checklists of how far is too far, I remember, oh gosh, who was the speaker? It was maybe Jason Everett. And he was joking about this on stage in Sydney somewhere. And he's like, the moment you start asking in a dating relationship, like, how far is too far, huh? With my girlfriend, is this too far? It's like the moment you're asking that question, you're doing it wrong. You've missed the point of what you're actually about here. And I think that is sort of starting to work through me, where I'm asking, like, well, how far is too far before it becomes too much and I got to go to confession over this thing? It's like, well, I think I've missed the plot, on that. There's something you were saying I did want to go back to. Oh, there's a movie or series with Andrew Garfield, which I decided I love Andrew Garfield. So I went and watched this other show that he created called Under the Banner of Heaven. And it's about a Mormon cult that I don't know if it was based on a true story or not, but it had to do with I think it was either a Mormon cult or a group of Mormons, and there was a story told about a specific family that just went above and beyond, and there's a lot of narcissism, and there's a lot of anti-countercultural stuff going on, and so he's an investigator trying to solve murder mysteries. And I mean, I just felt like getting whiplash watching it, because the family dynamics and the way that they would talk about things, the level of clarity that they wanted at every single point, the inability to differentiate what I think and what I want from what God thinks and what God wants. It's a really, really amazing show. And it really is all about that sense of doubt and that sense of how do I navigate questions. And there was something you were saying kind of working my way back to it. So one, that show was really helpful, but that sense of what do you do when you don't have the answers, when there cannot be an answer? And I think that's kind of where I am right now. And this then comes back to my sense of the church. We want there to be clear answers for everything. And I think there's a reason why we wrap, okay, this is where I was trying to go. We wrap things in liturgy. Okay. Now, if you think of our home lives and how we relate to each other in our home lives, that's wrapped in liturgy and rubrics. Here's how you go about, you know, being a good person within the liturgy of the family. And then we go to work, and here's how you talk and here's how you act within the liturgy of working. And if you think of liturgy as, if I would define it as a mutually accepted series of actions to serve the greatest common good, where we can all recognize here's how we operate in a common way, in a united way to serve a specific goal. Right? Somebody might go, yeah, that's not liturgy. It's like, well, okay, fine. But I think it works. So, but here's the thing with a lot of this, I think. You could also swap in another word, game theory, right? Or it's a game, right? There are specific things that we have to do to stay alive. And so what do we do as a culture is we create games around how to keep that going. And so what is the economy? It's a massive game. What is business? It's a specific game that you play. And you learn to skill up and level up so that you can play the game. You're raising kids. You're creating the game of here's how you win, or at the very least, how we get along within the game of being a family together. You make your bed, you do your thing, you don't talk back to your mother, you wash the dishes, you take out the trash, you do that, and you get ice cream and maybe an allowance and Friday library, I don't know, sleep over with your friends or something. All right. So there's rewards, there's a reward system. But then the kid becomes an adult, and then they're like, wait, you mean to tell me that none of this actually mattered for being a human being, and I could like get my own apartment and not do any of this stuff, and I'll actually survive and not spontaneously combust, oh my gosh, and it's that sort of thing that I've come to realize, oh, that's also happening with the church, in that the church, especially Eurocentric Western Christianity, which is what a lot of us are navigating as trads, there are a lot of liturgical things, and there are a lot of rubrics, and there's a lot of it can be very good. I think a lot of it was created for a different era of human history, a different era of our understanding of how we relate to each other and to the cosmos, and to how we see and understand Christ being alive and present in the world. And a lot of the thinking that went into that level of the game was from, I don't know, 200 years ago. We have progressed like the Dickens in the last 200 years in many ways. You can argue not all of them are good. That's a different discussion. There has been a lot of progress. There's been a lot of theological clarity because of stuff like scientific progress, or just the human family talking to itself a lot more. And then there's sort of the learning transfer of different cultures sharing stuff like I would never have considered, and how to approach, theology or God from this standpoint, because it was never obvious to us in the Christian West, and it maybe was over in the Christian East. And so all of a sudden there's like a massive amount of like, well, just learning that happens, but then also we have to revisit our own axioms, like how do we relate to each other? And it sort of took the church 400 years to decide, okay, we actually need to sit down at Vatican II and make sure we get everybody on the same page and update the manuals for how we all play the game of getting along and mediating and bringing Christ to the world. And it's that sense right there where we can run aground too fast and too often. And that's where, when you get rigid and scrupulous people being in charge of things, and like you just mentioned, laying additional straws on the camel's backs, adding new rules, like, okay, there's good reasons why we put rules around dating and courtship, or good reasons why we put rules around confirmation, for example. But at the same time, the whole point of the pastoral nature of the church is to recognize there's a point at which the wise, loving parent or a parochial person could decide, we can dispense with the rules. I know where you are and kind of what you need in this situation. Here, do this, or you now need to learn this thing, something like this. Little example actually that brought this really home for me was my marriage, where I went down to the local So I had a job opportunity. I don't remember if I mentioned this earlier in this conversation, but I had a job opportunity. I was going to fly down to Sydney, and all I needed to do was to get married to my wife, and we're going to fly down there. Actually, I think I mentioned this with Paul's conversation. And
No,
so,
it's cool because I was just thinking this sounds like it's going to lead right into your marriage story.
well, there
Oh,
you
it's so
go. Okay. So went down to the local parish and asked the priest what's possible, because if we don't kind of get married now, we're probably not. She doesn't want to wait a year, and we think this is a good thing. And I mean, we're both. I mean, we thought we were at the time, relative to most other people at that age. Maybe we were better, further along in our sort of marriage catechesis, and you're passionate, committed Catholics, and like really taking this stuff seriously. And the priest was like, "Well, the rules to the game are you start 6 months of marriage prep, and then there's 6 months engagement, and like whatever it was." And we were like, I can't wait that long. The clock is ticking on this job thing. And it, we like the vision of the future where we're together. And so we then drove down to another parish just to get a second opinion. And he was an old guy, old Ukrainian or Slovakian sort of priest who just, I don't know, was a parish priest of that church. And we asked him, what's doable here? And then so he said, okay, come back tomorrow evening. I want to get to know you a little bit more. And so we're like, oh, okay. And so we came back, and he pulled us separately and asked us very simple questions. And I think he took Maria in first, my wife. And I didn't know what was going on. It's like, man, I'm getting real nervous. And so I'm walking around the vestibule. I can't sit down. I'm trying to pray a rosary, and just like, then he pulls me in. She comes out, and she's kind of smiling a little bit, and I don't know what to expect. And she said, "It's okay." And she patted my shoulder and said, "Oh, okay." So I went in, and he closed the door, and he just basically asked stuff like, what is marriage, and why do you want to get married to her? And the only answer, I felt like I cheated the test because I kind of heard this from other Catholic talks, but it felt true to be able to say, I want to marry her because I love her. That's it. Not because she completes me or makes me feel better, or we're going to be a power couple together, or, build an empire. It's like, I love her. And he's like, okay, come on back in, Maria. So how does Monday sound? And so 3 days later, she and her mother-in-law panicked to went and go find a wedding dress. And I didn't have a suit that fit very well. And I was terrified. And 3 days later, she walked down the aisle, and we got married. And then the job fell through, and then life changed.
Oh
but that just showed me the sense of it is possible. There is a discretionary, cheat code that the hierarchy has, that priests and that people who mediate, the sacraments to us and so on also have, which is a sense that, like, if you're dating, or if there's all of the rubrics around dating, there's also a point at which we just got together as a culture and agreed to make them up. And okay, there's good things that can come from it. But when you see kids getting dogmatic and existential about the rules of the game, okay, calm down, everybody. We all need to back off. It's like playing baseball, and we're going, I have no idea if this is true. There's 1964 rules. Like, and if you're not playing by this, hey, wait a second. We're here to play ball. That's the point. And the rules help allow all of us to get together to make this happen. And so, okay, let's all agree, I guess, which version of the rules. But the point at which you're calling out other people about, like, you're never going to get to play ball again, or you're never getting into heaven if you follow this version of the rules. Like, well, hold on a second. I guess where I'm going with all of this is there's a difference that we're I think supposed to understand as discerning adults. And to have the Holy Father say a mature, discerning adult is what we're called to be, who's able to be pastoral, not just the priest being pastoral. We're pastoral. That's called relational. There's a specific game that we're all trying to play together, which is, how do I help you do better and thrive and be safer and level up in your life and be a better person? And how do I help, bounce off of you to do that too? And how do I integrate myself into a more holistic person? And how do we add, there's a part of this that I have to do. How do I add sacraments in there to help me do this? How do I relate to God, self, and other, keep that little happy Trinity flywheel going? I probably just need to end there. It's just when you get dogmatic about the rules of the game, when they were never meant to be taken that seriously. And I think that's where you end up being overly rigid. What's his name? Pedro Gabriel and I did a couple of short recordings on his book on rigidity, which is a brilliant book. And he draws this point between rigidity and laxity. And human culture teeters between these two temptations constantly. And each one looks at the other and goes, "You're the devil. This is how I'm a good person." Right? And Pedro makes the simple point. One, the church has never espoused these ideas. They're honestly not helpful for human thriving at any point of human history. The actual virtue is in the middle. It's not in purity spirals and extremist, mentalities. It's the sense that rules exist for a reason, but we also have to be grown-ups about rules and know when to apply them and when they do apply. And that's what the person requires. The ability for a person to exist requires this adult sense. And you can't tell this to children necessarily. Like, yeah, the rules for around bedtime apply in specific circumstances. Like, you can't tell that to your 8-year-old, whatever. I don't know, maybe your 8-year-old. Mine, I can't. They're ironclad, and you're getting punished if you don't follow the rules, but after you get to a certain point, like, you're supposed to like back off a little bit and allow more of that freedom. And I think the church is, especially since Vatican II, is recognizing, oh, we're supposed to have that relationship with the holy, faithful people of God, where we're holding hands together to accomplish something mutually, not they're the bottom of the pyramid and we're just mediating stuff down to them and telling them how to be good boys and girls. And I say you jump and you say how high.
Right. No, it's a really good point, like you said, about the relationship aspect and Vatican II using sort of a different language or approach than, like, say, the Council of Trent to present its teachings. Like, they were still valid and binding teachings, but they were expressed in that more of that style of, like, we're sitting down together and we're having a heart to heart, and this is what the church wants for you because this is what's best, but not like, if you don't do this, you're toast, and it's like the church has the right to talk like that if she deems
level
that's
6 on the toast meter.
Yes, right. But the church has done that, and then the church is looking out and going, that was the church's wisdom at that time, that was the better tone to take. And now the church's wisdom is, this is the better tone to take, and we should just rejoice in that direction. The church is in making a model for us and how we relate to all the other people in the world that we have to evangelize and to love. It's not, you can't separate evangelism from love because it's all part of that. And that's, you can have your fact knowledge and you can see what somebody's doing and say, oh, what you're doing is wrong. But what about the relationship? What about caring for that person and accompanying them? Like you keep saying, because that's such a great visual. It's like, nobody wants to be whacked with something. They want to be wooed with it. So how do you do that? I mean, it definitely requires more art and more patience, and just a lot more affection. It's like you should, like G.K. Chesterton said, you should fight for what is not sorry. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's basically like, when you're fighting for something, you should fight not because you hate what
them, but because you love the thing.
Thank you.
Something like that.
Can you say the whole thing?
I don't know. I'm assuming that's probably where he's going.
Yes, I should just look it up because this is so good. Okay. Love what is in. I think it's like, because you love what is in front of you, not because you hate what is behind you. But here, I'm gonna fix this, and I'm gonna cut out all my stammering. Ah, there it is. Okay. It's not gonna tell me where it's from, I don't think. Okay. So Chesterton said, the true soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him. So there again, it's like our intention and our motivation. It's key to everything. And when we're talking here about the church, making compromises basically, or cheating, or in like, a pastoral sense, it's not compromising on anything essential, because you can't compromise on truth.
No.
Truth is truth. But what happens in our minds and our writing as individual Catholic, thinkers or whatever, we can easily slide over into defining things as essential truths that actually aren't. And so we get off track, and then you're putting people under a burden that they weren't meant to bear. Yeah. So that's what you're saying.
That sense of like, just, I think it's true, but it's funny what we get up to. It's like, oh, you held hands before marriage. You have to take that to confession. Like,
oh,
wait, I mean, perhaps to wrap, there's the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is so beloved of the Holy Father. And there's another situation where rules were added to the central tenets of what it means to be alive and how to relate to God and how to relate to each other. And all of these additional purity culture rules were added. And the Samaritan is the one who's like, I know this game exists, and I know I'm not supposed to, as far as the rules of this whole culture game goes, I'm not supposed to cross these lines, but the actual deeper, bigger game that we're all actually in, I cannot leave, I cannot walk away from you. I have to just put aside all the rules, play by the deep magic, Aslan says.
That's great.
Play by those rules, right? Come over and bind and heal. Well, there was a post that I crafted early in my days with Smart Catholics where I was trying to make sense. Well, first of all, I was trying to make sense of what does this community do? What are we trying to contribute to the Catholic world? Who are we? And there's this sense of, I think it's really important that we be first responders, faith first responders. And here's, as far as the metaphor word go, and somebody could take it apart and go, yeah, it's okay, fine, probably. But if we pull on this thread for a second, what does a first responder do? If somebody's like on a ledge or somebody's got heartbreak or they're bleeding out, what's the first thing that you do? Is you don't start questioning their life choices and assure them that things are going to get worse if they continue down this path. Don't do that. You take, if you can, the weapons out of their hands. Depends on how conscious or attentive they are. You de-escalate the situation. You sit with them, you bind the wounds, you talk them off the ledge, because the assumption is it is good for you to be here. And if you're trying to take yourself out or something, there's something wrong. It is not healthy. It is not appropriate, or something like that. So the first responder doesn't ask, how did you end up in a bloody pile in the street? At this point, I don't care. Let's just get you okay, and we're going to do everything we can. Well, if you take this to a faithful standpoint, I think Mary is this beautiful first responder. She models this in a really beautiful way. And because I'm a genius, I've completely forgotten my points in that article, which were wonderful, and they are linked in the community for those who want them, and I should go back and reread them. But the sense that if you meet somebody in your parish, or there's just somebody at your school or whoever, they got a broken heart, or they're going through a lot of pain or trauma. And I mean, this is the thing with pain. Pain is like, I think it's described as like the eighth sacrament or something, partly tongue in cheek, because it's the one thing that we all have to endure that brings you back home into the present moment. Nothing else does this as clearly. And it reminds you of your mortality. It reminds you of your not just deficiency as a human, the fact that you can't and you don't control everything, and that you live in a massive amount of dependence. Nobody lone wolves through pneumonia, right? You need your human family to help carry you and stuff like that. So what if that was the foundational sort of Good Samaritan mindset? Somebody's in pain. I don't care necessarily how you got into that situation. What matters is right now you need food, friendship, accompaniment, attention, and you may end up thrashing around like a wild cat, and I'm trying to pull you out of the water, and you may end up harming me. And okay, then I need to discern: am I the right person to be pulling a, I don't know, mountain lion? Am I the right person, or do I need to call somebody else who's got full-on armor for the situation? Okay, well, that's where some discernment comes in. But assuming it's a small cat, can I handle the fact that this person may lash out at me and say things that are hurtful to me, that I don't believe, and that I think are maybe very dangerous and harmful or something, but can I allow them to process whatever they need to say? And can I still try to get them out of a situation that I think might be dangerous if they want me to help them do that, right? And that's where, when a first responder shows up and somebody's in a state of danger, it's like a hostage negotiation, maybe, where let's de-escalate. I hear you. I'm paying attention to you. Let's put the dangerous thing down. And let's have that conversation. You can say whatever you need to say. Nobody's going to force you to do anything, And then when you recognize, wait a second, God acts like that to me every day of my life. He's constantly acting that way, and he's never once showed up in my life with a baseball bat and go, dude, you're not getting it. Would you just please? It's just never happened, because it won't happen. Well, what happens when we do that for each other? No matter what religion somebody else is, or spiritual but not religious, or I don't know, whatever. That's where I think we then come back to that line from St. Peter. And for me, it always comes back to this, I think, always be prepared to have a reason for the hope that is in you. And my gosh, apologetics love that one. But we miss, we short circuit the fact that we're called to have that hope, and we're called to live that, and we're called to live a kind of life where people look at you and then they go, huh, why are you still playing the game? Like, at all? I don't know why you're still here. I mean, why are you nice to anybody? Like, the world sucks. Like, everything sucks. Like, how are you nice, like, at all, or getting ahead, being successful, or doing anything with a nice attitude and people like you? I mean, hey, I kind of like you, maybe. You have hope, and you have maybe faith, and there's charity. You've got these virtues going on. Like, okay, why does all this matter for you? Today, almost more than ever, maybe before, especially given the level of depression rates and suicide rates in our culture. This, I think, is needed more than all of the answers in the world, because we have a ton of celebrities, and we've got a ton of people going straight to online, and they're tweeting all the answers, and nobody cares. And that is not the place for how we mediate truth to each other. I think there is a place, okay, fine. Yes, we need things like podcasts and blogs. And yes, you do need spaces where people stand up and say, here's what I think is true and I think is helpful for everybody's lives, and it's helpful for me, and maybe you'll have a better life if you do it too. Okay, there's a place for that.
Yeah.
Do you do that in the parish hall? Do you do that to your friend when they come over for Thanksgiving dinner? Do you use all of these family festival opportunities as evangelization, for zealotizing situation? Is that appropriate? I don't know. Because if they look at you and all they see is a jackass, why would they trust what you think is true when they don't think you're a true person,
Right. Well, why can't we wait until people, I get like, I've heard stories about, like from the Legion of Mary about, why don't you ask people, have you ever thought about becoming Catholic or something? And that sometimes people are like, I can do that. Like, or I've just been waiting for somebody to ask. Or like, there are stories like that where it's like, you're making an invitation. You're just asking a question. That's another thing that's pretty safe, is asking questions, because it helps you understand, helps you to listen, helps that person to share what they need to, debrief themselves of. And it's not like you're sitting there telling them, you're asking them, and you can often get them to say a lot of things, maybe for the first time ever, that make them realize truths that were in there. They needed to unlock it. You didn't have to sit there and rattle off the catechism, or you just are present to them and you love them as you can. And you wait for those promptings of the Holy Spirit. If you feel like this real urge, not just like this conscience stricken, like, shouldn't I say this thing right now and remind them that the church teaches blah, 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 blah. I mean, because when you feel anxious, it's like, that's not the Holy Spirit moving in anxiety and distress. It's like, if he moves and you just see this perfect moment and you're like, I think I'm just going to say this, then that's the moment that they can receive it, and you can trust that. But you didn't make it happen. But you can also wait for them to say things to you and to ask you questions. Like, if you're really showing them something wonderful, they won't be able to help themselves from asking, what makes you like that? What changed you? Or how do I have that? And it's okay. Like, how many times do we actually wait to be asked for advice or counsel before we give it? And St. Francis of Assisi, famously said that always preach the gospel and sometimes use words. And I think we're just so in love with words. I mean, I love talking, I love reading, I love writing, I love everything about words and conversation, and I sure like to get my fair share in, obviously, because I keep jumping in here. But I have so much to learn from you. So I'm glad for everything that you shared, but I know I need to kind of scale back from that and fall in love more with listening and learning and discovering. And that's not always verbal. And I can still trust it, that God is showing me truth and he's communicating to people without me jumping in there and putting words on it. So
agreed. A thought that I am trying to turn into an axiom, and because I think it is true, it's just very hard to actually pay attention to and do. It's actually a piece of advice from Father Richard that I've really grown to love, and it was buried in the middle of one of his talks, and so it made a lot more sense there. But he basically said, anytime that you are feeling defensive, right? Because you were talking about the sense of anxiety and trying to share something and like make sure you get the right thing in. And then he made this little point where he said, anytime that you are feeling defensive, that is a mark that almost whatever you want to say or do is coming from the wrong place. Now, you'll need the rest of the talk, of course, for that to make a lot of sense. What he's talking about is there's the true self of you, and then there's the false self of you, and we over-identify with the false self. The true self is the one Christ is trying to flower and birth and bring to bear, and The false self is all of our silly ideas of ourselves. It's the bad habits that we brought into the world. It's the part that like is hanging on like death and does not want to do the dying thing, right? Which is why we're here. We're here like the seed that does, what is that line from scripture? The seed is planted so that it can die, so that the thing can live, so the plant can grow. And the false self, which is our false sense of identity, does not want to do this go through this dying process thing. And anytime that we are defensive about anything, it's because we're over identifying ourselves with a position or a topic or an idea, as opposed to it being something outside of us. Like I love history, and I would get insanely defensive about the mistakes that the church would get up to in the past, or misinterpretations of history and stuff like that. And I would start getting like, man, that rankles me when people bring it up. And it's taken me years to realize I had no say in any of that stuff. I actually don't agree with like how a lot of it ended up happening. A lot of it is very regretful. Did some good come out of it? Maybe, probably. I don't have to justify anything. They didn't ask for me to defend them. Just let it be. I don't need to be defensive about this thing or conversation I'm having with somebody, and they bring up something that's like I profoundly disagree with, but then to realize they didn't actually ask my opinion. They're stating something that feels obviously true to them. They don't actually care what I think, and they don't want me to talk about it. Why should I? In this moment, is it actually a good thing to? And of course, the defensive part of me is like, you can't let this slide and you have to set things straight. And it's like, well, maybe it's more important right now to bite my tongue and communicate to the other person, you're safe to say whatever you want to me. Then if you do want my opinion, I'm happy to share it. But at that point, you've asked for it. Maybe you're interested, And so that comes back, I guess, to that Bible verse. Be ready or have a reason for the hope that is in you when people ask you. They don't ask you, how, and if you're operating especially out of defensiveness. So then the task or my challenge is every time I feel defensive about anything, especially with my wife or my family, it's like, do not operate out of defensiveness. That never goes well. But just with anybody, really. I'm trying to catch that, trying to pay attention, how to watch my reactions. Do I need to say this right now? Is it actually helpful? Maybe it's more important to let it slide and to find the good thing that I can agree with, right? And maybe that comes back to the first responder ethos, which I think is the most important thing out of all of this. Yeah.
That is such a great analogy. I'm really glad that you brought that up about the first responder. I will link the other interview that you did with Paul down below so people can listen to that, because it was also excellent. You guys talked about so many profound things in such a positive way, and I just think it's going to be really edifying for people to hear that. And I hope you keep sharing your story and your perspective on things, because I think it's you're very articulate, you're very kind and approachable, and it's going to help a lot of people synthesize their own processes and what God is trying to show them in their lives and how he is present to them. Because again, we got to make our faith about the person of Jesus and not the structure without him. There would be no structure without him. It's very fundamental, and that's what Pope Francis is really trying to get the world to see, I believe, is the person of Jesus and everything, because that is where it all began. And he gets lost in the shuffle sometimes, and that sounds terrible, but it does happen. It's like we start to like our own constructs better than him. And you can't have, I'm sorry, but you can't have a relationship with an idea. You can't have a relationship with a construct or a system. It's got to be with a person. And someday, if that's happened to you, someday you'll realize, wait, there's nobody in here. What am I doing?
It's always wonderful to chat with you.
Yes, you too, Dominic. I appreciate your time so much. And I don't want to keep you too long, but it was really great for me to hear everything that you shared, and hopefully for my audience too. Thank you.